to Egypt following the ouster of Presidents Zine al-Abidine Ben Ali and Hosni Mubarak. Osama bin Laden hasn't uttered a single word so far, at least, about the changes sweeping the region. And when Ayman al-Zawahiri, al-Qaeda's #2, spoke recently, he reiterated the group's known stance. Meanwhile, Libyan leader Muammar Gaddafi says those protesting against him are led by al-Qaeda. He claims an Islamic State has been established in the eastern provinces of his country.
All the people of Derna cleansed them. A man with a beard announced that women should not be allowed out to the streets. Did you see? And he claimed himself the Khalifa, following bin Laden and al-Zawahiri, who will rule you at the end. They are a small number. Wherever you hear about their movement, they are a small number of terrorists trying to turn Libya into states ruled by al-Zawahiri or bin Laden. So America can come saying it won't allow a new Afghanistan in North Africa.
Well, for more on this, I'm joined now by our three guests. From Washington, D.C., Robert Grenier, the former director of the Counter-Terrorism Unit at the CIA. From London, Kamal Helbawi, founder of the Muslim Association of Britain. And also from London, Phil Rees, terrorism expert and author of Dining with Terrorists, Meetings with the World's Most Wanted Militants. Welcome to you all. Robert Grenier, you worked for a very long time on counterterrorism at the CIA and on ways for the U.S. to curb the influence of al-Qaeda. Where have the revolutions in making that we've seen in the Arab world so far left the influence of the organization? Is it in a weakened position or quite emboldened by the fact that some of its longtime enemies, like Hosni Mubarak, have now been ousted?
Well, you know, you would think that it should be emboldened and that this should be a welcome development for the organization. But in fact, I think in a strategic perspective, this is a very bad thing for the organization. And the fact that, as you've just mentioned, we're hearing very little from al-Qaeda right now, I think underscores that fact, that essentially events are sweeping past them. And what we're seeing now in the region, I think, is underscoring the irrelevance of the organization to the future of the Middle East.
Phil Rees, how relevant has al-Qaeda become to the future of the Middle East if some of these governments that will now take shape following certainly the uprisings in Egypt, Tunisia, possibly Libya, and who knows where else in the future, if these regimes, governments represent the national interests of their own people, might we see a less America-friendly foreign policy?
Well, of course, this will take the ground from underneath al-Qaeda. I mean, if you look for one reason for the cause of what the West now calls terrorism, it is the lack of space for political Islam in the Middle East. And if political Islam is to be given that space, then I think al-Qaeda will be fundamentally weakened. So I think it's very clear to me that this is what the United States will have to consider in its future policies. Now, if you look at the statements from al-Qaeda now, they're saying actually the revolutions are incomplete. They're phony. They will be hijacked. And in fact, the United States will impose a Mubarak version 2 in Egypt. But while that doesn't happen, while a genuine democracy emerges and political Islam is allowed space, al-Qaeda will be weakened.
Do you agree with that, Kamal Helbawi? Will al-Qaeda be weakened? After all, in these uprisings that we saw certainly in Egypt, there was scarce mention of any religious fundamentalism or any anti-American sentiment, even though polls throughout the last few years have suggested that there is a relative amount of anti-Americanism in the region, but not in this instance. There seemed to be a push for more democracy, more freedom, more opportunity.
Political Islam movements have been struggling a long time ago, and they paid a very high price in prisons and detained and prevented and called banned al-Mahdura in Egypt, for example. And America was pressurizing political Islam, listening to the foolish advice of stupid rulers like Mubarak, like Gaddafi, like others in Saudi Arabia. And this, even during the last week, when David Cameron, the Prime Minister, was in Cairo, he said, I will not visit the Muslim Brotherhood or have any dialogue with them, and did the same mistake done by Condoleezza Rice in 2005 when she visited the American University, Cairo, until they discovered that the only democratic group in or movement in the Middle East are the Islamic movements or political Islam movement. Of course, there is a relatively reality and truth in what Robert is saying from America, that if you give a chance to political Islam movements and they flourish naturally, they will gain ground, and the Muslim people and young men will find that there is a future, and they are participating in reshaping the future, so they will not be attracted to violent or to terrorist or extremist ideologies. And during the last revolution in Egypt, you have seen that the Salafis are asking people not to join the demonstrations, and you have never heard anything from the ex-violent groups, whether Jamaat Islami or jihadi groups in Egypt. You never heard anything after the revision books they produced, and they have some relation with security apparatus in Egypt.
Right.
Let
me take this point then to Robert Grenier. There seems to be a tendency, Robert Grenier, in Washington particularly, to lump all of these Muslim Islamist groups in one basket without making any distinction between them, despite the fact that the Muslim Brotherhood has espoused democratic ideals, has engaged in the democratic process in Egypt for many years. How much acceptance now is there in Washington that the previous policy to shun these groups has been a failure? How much of a dilemma is Washington in today, and will it decide to rethink fundamentally its approach to these groups?
Well, I certainly hope so. I think that there are many here in Washington and strongly represented in the United States among currents of opinion that one hears here to do precisely what you're describing, that is to lump all of the different Islamically oriented groups in one basket. And when you debate with them, as I frequently have, they can always find quotes from some leader, which appears to be very strongly anti-Israeli or strongly anti-American, and obviously that there will be room for those currents of thought. There is, I guess I would describe what we see in Washington right now as tentative support for the participation of Islamist groups in the democratic awakening that we're seeing in the Middle East right now. I think, however, people will be watching very closely, and there will certainly be those who will seize the opportunity when and if it presents itself to say, aha, you see, these are groups that are very negative. They are essentially anti-democratic, and they should be resisted.
Robert Grenier, the specter of Islamist radicalism is being brandished very often, obviously in the context of Libya, but also in Tunisia, in Egypt as well. The leadership there saying that, we should stay put because the alternative would be absolute chaos. Hillary Clinton just a couple of days ago was saying that her biggest fear was that Libya would turn into a giant Somalia. She expressed concern about the number of al-Qaeda recruits